At 9:27 a.m. on December 13th, 1943, the humid air over the Brahmaputra Valley shimmered with heat. The winter had brought a lull to the monsoon rains, and Assam's wide green expanse lay under a sky of pale blue tea gardens, stretched like quilts across the hills. Mist hovered over the great river. In the distance, ridges of the Patkai Range faded into the horizon. Second Lieutenant Philip W. Adair, age 23, sat in the cramped cockpit of his Curtiss P-40N Warhawk. The airplane was painted olive drab with a red spinner, the famous shark mouth grinning around the spinner, and the number 44 painted white on the fuselage side. Its name, Lulu Bell, was emblazoned just under the cockpit. Adair wore a khaki flight suit, a life vest, a leather helmet with headphones, and an oxygen mask that hung loosely around his neck. His left hand rested on the throttle. His right held the control stick. He was not thinking of fame or glory. He was thinking about the hump, the nickname for the treacherous Himalaya mountains that separated India from China, and about the cargo planes that flew over them every day to supply Allied forces fighting the Japanese. The China-Burma-India theater was often called the Forgotten Theater of World War II, yet it was crucial. In 1943, the Japanese army controlled Burma and cut the land routes that had linked India to China. American and British strategists decided to keep China in the war by flying supplies over the Himalayas from India. Flying over the hump was dangerous. The mountains reached 15,000 to 20,000 feet, weather changed quickly, and Japanese fighters prowled. Yet every day, C-47 Skytrains and C-46 commando transports carried drums of fuel, crates of ammunition, food, medical supplies, and spare parts to Kunming and other Chinese airfields. Without those flights, Chinese forces would have collapsed. The Allied base at Dinjan, in Assam, was one of the main hubs for the hump airlift. It maintained a squadron of transport aircraft, a field hospital, fuel tanks, maintenance depots, and a fighter detachment for protection. Adair had been assigned to the 89th Fighter Squadron of the 85th Fighter Group. The group's emblem was a winged skull wearing an Indian headdress, the Burma Banshees. The skull represented death to the enemy. The wings symbolized flight. The squadron's mission was to escort transports, defend bases, and attack Japanese targets along the Burma Road. Adair had flown 43 combat missions since arriving in theater. He was trained at Luke Field in Arizona and at Douglas Army Airfield. His gunnery and formation flying were sharp. He had learned to handle the Warhawk, a rugged but unforgiving aircraft. He had learned to keep his head when anti-aircraft bursts dotted the sky, when tracers streaked past, and when green jungle blurred under the wings. What he had not yet faced was an entire enemy formation alone. Around 9:25 a.m., local time, a radar station at Chabwa picked up a large blip approaching from the east. The observer phoned the operations desk at Dinjan. "Large bogey formation inbound," he said. "Estimate 20 to 30 bombers. Fighters unknown." At the same moment, the sound of engines reached pilots at Dinjan Mechanics looked up from their work. The low hum grew into a deep throb. Adair, already airborne on an early patrol, saw the enemy before anyone else. Through the haze, he counted rows of silver dots moving west. As they drew nearer, their shapes became clear. Twin-engine bombers with glazed noses and dorsal turrets, and single-engine fighters with radial engines and slender wings. He estimated 24 bombers and at least 40 fighters. That meant roughly 64 enemy aircraft. The bombers were Mitsubishi Ki-21 Type 97 heavy bombers, codenamed Sally by the Allies. Each carried up to 1,100 kilograms of bombs and had defensive guns. Their maximum speed was about 265 miles per hour at altitude. The fighters were Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa, codenamed Oscar. They were agile and deadly in the hands of experienced pilots. The Oscars formed protective layers above and below the bomber stream. They would try to keep any defenders away until the bombers reached their target. The previous 2 months had been hard. The Japanese Army Air Force had mounted a series of raids on Allied installations across Assam and Bengal. On October 25th, they attacked Chittagong and damaged several runways. In November, they hit Sylhet, destroying transport planes on the ground. They targeted fuel dumps, hospitals, and warehouses. Their raids came in the morning, using the rising sun to blind defenders. They descended through holes in the clouds, dropped bombs with deadly accuracy, and disappeared before fighters could scramble. In 8 weeks, they had destroyed 47 transport aircraft on the ground and killed 112 personnel. The attacks were crippling. Without transports, the hump would close. Dinjan was particularly vulnerable. It had minimal anti-aircraft defenses, mostly 40mm Bofors guns, and a few 50 caliber machine gun emplacements. Its fighters were often away on escort missions. Reinforcements at other fields were 30 to 40 minutes away. Allied headquarters knew this and ordered fighters to intercept raids as far from the base as possible. But that morning, only one fighter was already airborne. The rest were being refueled or armed. Adair looked at the fuel gauge on his instrument panel. It read full. His Warhawk carried 120 gallons in the fuselage tank and 60 gallons in the wing tanks. The fuel would last about 90 minutes at 2,100 RPM cruise, less if he used maximum power. He had enough for combat. His engine, an Allison V1 710-81, was a liquid-cooled V12 that produced 1,240 horsepower at 3,000 RPM with 56 inches of manifold pressure on emergency power. It was reliable, but sensitive to overheating and coolant leaks. A large scoop under the nose fed air to the radiator. His cockpit instruments included tachometer, manifold pressure gauge, oil temperature, oil pressure, coolant temperature, fuel pressure, altimeter, airspeed indicator, turn and bank indicator, and a clock. Beneath the gun sight were 2 counters showing rounds remaining for the left and right sets of guns. At full load, he had 1,200 rounds total, 200 rounds per gun. The 50 caliber Brownings had a high rate of fire, about 750 rounds per minute, so he had about 12 seconds of continuous firing before his ammunition was gone. He needed to make every burst count. He weighed his options. According to the Fighter Tactics Manual, a pilot confronted with overwhelming odds should avoid engagement until reinforced. He could radio the other fighters to scramble. The trouble was time. The nearest P-40s were at Tezbour, 38 minutes away. The bombers would reach Dinjan in 12. Even if he trailed the formation and relayed updates, the transports, hospital, and fuel stores would be destroyed before help arrived. He thought about the hospital tents. He thought about the wounded soldiers lying on cots. He thought about the C-47s lined up wingtip to wingtip. He knew that turning away would be safe for him, but disastrous for many others. He pressed the microphone button. All stations, this is Lulu Bell. Large enemy formation. 20-plus bombers. 40-plus fighters heading west. At 240 knots. 3,000 feet below, I am engaging. There was no reply. Others had heard the engines too, and were scrambling to their aircraft. He decided to attack. He eased the throttle forward. The manifold pressure gauge climbed. He adjusted the mixture control, leaned just enough for power, but not so much as to overheat. He checked the propeller pitch at fine. Lulu Bell responded. The P-40 had a heavy feel compared to more nimble fighters, but it was stable in a dive and sturdy. He trimmed the elevators to maintain a slight nose-down attitude as he gained speed. He positioned himself 4,000 feet above the bombers and slightly to their south. He wanted the sun behind him, so the Japanese gunners wouldn't see his dark shape against the glare. He took a deep breath. The morning air smelled of fuel, oil, and leather. In his throat he felt the dryness of fear. The Japanese formation maintained discipline. The Sallies flew in 2 Vs of 3, nose to tail, wingtip to wingtip. Their gunners scanned the sky for threats. The Oscars were above and below in stepped groups. Each Oscar had 2 12.7mm Ho, 103 machine guns. Most had removed the wing guns to save weight. They were lethal if they could get close. The Oscar pilots had learned the P-40's weaknesses, its weight, its poor climb, and its inability to turn with Japanese fighters. They favored turning dogfights, where their lighter, more maneuverable aircraft could outturn and outclimb the heavier American fighters. Adair knew that. He resolved to avoid turning with them. He would use altitude to dive, attack, and climb away. He rolled Lulu Bell inverted. The world turned upside down. The rice paddies now hung above. The sky lay beneath. He pulled the stick back and dove. The airspeed built. 320 miles per hour, 340, 360. The wind noise increased. The Allison engine maintained its bellow. The control surfaces felt heavy. The bomber formation grew large in his sight. He placed the leading edge of his K-14 gun sight on the center bomber in the left V. At 800 yards, he squeezed the trigger. 6 Brownings roared. The cockpit trembled. The smell of burnt powder mixed with the odor of glycol. Streamers of tracers arced toward the bomber. He saw strikes on the wing, the engine nacelle. The bomber's left engine spouted flame. It dropped out of formation. Smoke poured. The crew inside probably panicked. They had no armor. They wore cotton uniforms and cloth helmets. They had no parachutes. As flames licked the wing root, the bomb load inside might have detonated. Adair had no time to look. He pulled back, felt heavy G-force slam him into his seat. His vision darkened as blood drained from his head. He panted to keep from blacking out. He rolled right. Tracers whipped past. The Oscars had seen him. 4 were diving from his 10 o'clock high. He pushed the stick left and up, fired a brief burst. His tracers flashed past one Oscar. The fighter broke right. Its wingman followed. 2 others pressed on. He rolled inverted and dove to keep his speed. The Oscars followed, but fell behind. 2 more Oscars dived from above. He saw them at 400 yards, pulled into a climbing left turn and fired again. Tracers stitched the sky. No hits. He glanced at his ammunition counters. One showed 400 rounds, the other 450. He had used about 300 rounds in the first attack he must conserve. Behind the fighters, the Sallies tried to reform. 2 groups of 6 began easing back into V formation. Discipline and training showed. The Japanese crewmen did not panic long. They had bombed Rangoon, Chittagong, and Calcutta. Their bombs had destroyed docks, trains, warehouses, ships. They were professionals. If they reformed, they would line up, open their bomb bay doors, and drop their loads on Dinjan with deadly results. Adair looked at his altitude, 5,000 feet. He looked at his fuel, still near full. He looked at the bombers, 20 miles away. He had perhaps 5 minutes. He pressed the throttle fully forward, redlining the manifold pressure at 56 inches. The Allison responded. He dove again. This time he aimed for the right-hand Sally formation he attacked from their 8 o'clock. He fired at the lead bomber's engine. His tracers converged on the right engine. It exploded in a bright ball. The bomber rolled right, trailing flame. Its wingman broke formation. Adair kicked left rudder, slid left, and fired at another Sally. His bullets tore through thin duralumin skin. The bomber shuddered, but he didn't see if it went down. He was aware of Oscars closing behind. Pause. Imagine being suspended in that cockpit, strapped into a harness, feeling the weight of acceleration and gravity as you push an 8,000-pound machine through the air. The sky is suddenly full of planes. You are alone. You have seconds to make decisions. The smell of smoke, the rattle of guns, the knowledge that every bullet you fire, every second you wait, could save or doom hundreds on the ground. The mind has to focus, to narrow on the immediate target, while the body responds to vibrations and instruments. One cannot overstate the courage required to continue these attacks with no support. Oscars were now diving from above and behind. They came in pairs. Their tactic was to attack head-on or from an oblique angle, fire a burst, then climb away. 2 fighters came head-on. They opened fire at 500 yards. Their tracers, 7.7 millimeter rounds, were slower, glowing orange. They walked toward his nose. He fired back. His .50 caliber bullets smashed into one Oscar's engine cowling. Coolant sprayed. The fighter rolled out of formation. Its wingman followed. 2 more Oscars dived at him. One overshot. The other passed under him. He slipped past them by sheer speed. He saw another group of 6 Oscars forming below the bombers, climbing to cut him off. He decided to dive beyond them. Speed was his friend. He pushed the stick forward. The nose dropped. The Warhawk roared downward. Airspeed built to 405 miles per hour. The Oscar pilots could not follow. Their engines would overspeed. He leveled at the bomber's level. He lined up on the right formation. He fired short bursts to conserve ammo. Another bomber took hits. Another engine exploded. Pieces of metal and fabric fell away. Again the formation broke. He pulled up. The G-forces slammed him into his seat. He saw smoke pouring from his engine cowling. He looked at the coolant temperature gauge. 248 degrees danger. The Allison was overheating. The engine ran at extreme temperature for over 10 minutes. He had run at full power. The coolant system was designed for short bursts. Overheating could cause the cylinder heads to warp, valves to stick, pistons to seize. He had to decide, reduce power and cool the engine, or keep going. The bombers were 14 miles away. He kept going. He told himself he would not let the bombers reach the field. 2 Oscars crossed his tail and fired. He heard bullets strike the fuselage and wings. He felt a thump. He looked out to his right wing. Several bullet holes appeared in the fabric. Then he felt mushiness in the aileron. A bullet must have severed a control rod. He tested the ailerons. Sluggish. He still had some roll control with elevator differential and rudder. He would manage. Another bullet burst through the instrument panel. Sparks flew. A wire burned. Smoke filled the cockpit. He coughed. The smell was acrid. He slid the canopy back a few inches to let air in. The engine temperature rose to 260 degrees. The coolant boiled. Steam hissed out of seams. Another bullet hit the coolant reservoir behind the firewall glycol sprayed. He wiped the spray from his goggles. The engine sounded rough. He had run at full power too long. He eased the throttle slightly, then pushed it again. The engine coughed, but continued. He leaned the mixture to reduce fuel flow and heat. It helped a little. The Oscar fighters were closing again, more of them, maybe 12. He turned toward them head-on. The fighter's silhouette grew. He fired a burst to force them to brake. They scattered. He dove again. The bombers were now 12 miles from Dinjan. They still posed a threat. He must keep them from forming. He chose the largest group and dived on them from 8 o'clock high. He fired at the lead bomber. The bullet stream struck the fuselage. The bomber did not go down, but it turned away. Its wingman followed, leaving the formation. Again and again he attacked. After each run he climbed, turned, dove again. He felt his arms ache from pulling the stick. He felt sweat run down his back. He felt fear, but controlled it. His ammunition counters showed 350 rounds left, total, enough for perhaps 4 more passes. His fuel gauge showed 160 gallons. Enough. His engine temperature gauge hovered at 255. He could not sustain this. He saw smoke in the cockpit again, this time thicker. Electrical wires behind the panel were burning. He smacked them with his gloved hand. He smelled burning insulation. He opened the canopy wider. Wind blasted the cockpit. Maps flapped. As he attacked, he monitored his 6. The Oscar pilots were disciplined. They seldom fired head-on. They preferred to get behind. They waited for him to climb and lose speed. Then they attacked. He avoided their trap by making shallow dives and quick climbs, never climbing too steeply. He used rudder to slide sideways, making his path unpredictable. The P-40 was stable, but heavy. He muscled it through. Another group of Oscars came in at 4 o'clock low. He saw them too late. Bullets slammed into his right wing. One bullet cut through the aileron control rod completely. The right aileron flopped. He lost roll control on that side. Another bullet punctured the oil cooler. Oil pressure dropped. His engine temperature climbed. He could feel vibration through the control stick. The Allison began to shake. If the bearings ran dry, the engine would seize. Then a puff of flame erupted from under the cowling. The engine had caught fire. Flames in a P-40 usually meant the pilot was done. The hydraulic fluid, oil, fuel, and glycol could cause an intense fire. Pilots were trained to cut the fuel, kill the ignition, bank the aircraft to blow out the flame, and bail out. But there were Japanese soldiers in the jungle below. He was 8,000 feet up, 10 miles from friendly lines. He decided to keep the engine running. He pulled the mixture control back to idle cutoff for a few seconds. The engine sputtered, starving. The flame decreased. He pushed the mixture forward. The engine coughed, regained some power. He repeated the procedure. Each time he starved the engine of fuel, the fire weakened. Each time he added fuel, it sputtered, but kept running. He balanced the engine between running and dying. The flames subsided. Smoke continued. He turned toward Dinjan. The bombers were now scattering southeast. He had done his part. The base was safe. He radioed, "Dinjan, this is Lulu Bell enemy bombers turning back. Fighters still in area. I am returning. Engine damaged. Request emergency landing. The radio crackled. No reply. He was too low, or the radio was damaged. It didn't matter. He set a course southwest. The Japanese fighters followed. They circled above him, waiting. One pulled alongside. The Japanese pilot wore goggles and a silk scarf. He gestured downward. Land. Give up. Adair shook his head. He checked his altimeter. 6,000 feet. Airspeed, 180. Oil pressure, 0. Coolant temperature, over 260. He looked back. Oscar fighters remained at a distance, watching like vultures. Smoke in the cockpit thickened. The wires behind the instrument panel glowed. He pulled his oxygen mask down and breathed through it. The oxygen cleaned the air slightly, but oxygen was also flammable. He had to balance. He cracked the canopy further. Wind buffeted his head. The canopy moved on its rails. He wedged it with his elbow. Then his right aileron control cable snapped completely. The aileron flopped down. The P-40 rolled right violently. The nose dropped. He pulled the stick left and back, but the elevator cables were also frayed. They gave little input. The Warhawk was in a dive. He saw treetops. He had seconds. That's when his training, memory, and instinct combined. He recalled hearing about inverted flight reversing control issues. He hadn't practiced it much, but he knew the principle. He had to act. He rolled the aircraft upside down. It was against every instinct. Pilots are trained to stay upright. Inverted, negative G's pressed him against his shoulder straps. Blood flooded his head. His vision reddened. He kept the airplane upside down. He was now ascending relative to the earth. The damaged aileron, which had pushed the wing down right side up, now pushed it up. The jammed elevator, which had forced the nose down, now forced it up. The airplane leveled. He was flying inverted, holding the stick slightly forward to maintain altitude. The engine sputtered. The fuel system was not designed for inverted flight. He returned to positive G flight for a few seconds to let fuel flow, then inverted again. The pattern saved him from crashing. He repeated this flip repeatedly. He gained altitude inverted, lost some upright, then regained again, inverted. Each cycle lasted maybe 30 seconds. He was balancing altitude, fuel starvation, smoke inhalation, and structural stress. The Japanese fighters above watched in astonishment. They did not attack. Perhaps they had never seen such a maneuver. Perhaps they were short on ammunition. Perhaps they were simply stunned by the sight of a flaming Warhawk rolling like a seal in water. Regardless, they let him go. Over the next minutes, Adair coaxed his dying machine back toward the friendly base. His fuel gauge now read 90 gallons. His oil pressure gauge still read 0. He knew the engine should have seized. The connecting rods, crankshaft, camshaft, all required oil. Without it, they would weld. That the engine ran meant there was still some oil, or that friction and momentum had not yet destroyed it. The engine vibrated. He could feel the vibration frequency change, perhaps as the metal expanded. He prayed it would hold. He spotted Noga Airfield ahead, an expanse of pierced steel planking runway, a control tower, maintenance sheds, revetments lined with aircraft. He was still at 5,000 feet. He needed to descend and land. The sun glinted off the water of a nearby creek. The wind came from the east. He lined up downwind. He checked his landing gear lever. He pulled it. Nothing. He needed hydraulic pressure. He improvised an autopilot. He took his lap belt, looped it around the stick, and tightened it. It kept the airplane straight. He grabbed the manual hydraulic pump on the left side of the cockpit. He pumped with both hands. Sweat dripped down his face. His gloves slipped. He pumped 28 times. He felt resistance. He heard the gear clunk down and lock. He looked at the indicators. 3 green lights. The gear was down. He unlooped the lap belt and took control again. Airspeed dropped to 130 miles per hour. He still had to keep enough speed to avoid stalling. He approached the base. On the ground, crews watched with binoculars. They saw a P-40 with smoke streaming from the engine, gear down, flaps up, flying irregularly. They assumed it might be an enemy attempting to crash into them. Technical Sergeant Robert Martinez rushed to a .50 caliber machine gun. He aimed. He hesitated. The aircraft did not open fire. Martinez lowered his finger. He recognized the shark mouth. He told his men to hold fire. Fire trucks rolled out to the runway. At 2 miles from the runway, the Allison engine coughed. The propeller slowed. It stopped. The engine had finally seized. The Warhawk became a glider. The glide ratio of a P-40 with gear down and no flaps was poor. At 2,000 feet, he would glide perhaps 2 miles. He was exactly that distance from the threshold. It would be close. He recalled his training. An inverted glide could reduce drag. He rolled inverted again at 1,800 feet. This was insane, but he had no choice. He flew upside down toward the runway. The ground upside down looked surreal. Trees reached down from the top of his view. The runway seemed to hover above. He held inverted for as long as his brain could stand the blood rush. At 400 feet, he rolled upright. The nose dropped. He pulled back. The Warhawk came down steeply. He crossed the threshold at 90 feet. He held the nose high to reduce speed. The P-40 flared. The main wheels struck the steel planking hard, with a jolt that rattled his teeth. The right gear strut had been hit earlier. It buckled. The wingtip touched the ground. The airplane pivoted right. Ground looped 180 degrees and slid backward. Metal screeched on metal. Sparks showered. Dust rose. Then the airplane stopped. Smoke poured from the engine. Adair sat for a moment, his heart pounding. He released his harness, pushed open the canopy, and stood. His legs trembled. He climbed onto the wing and slid to the ground. Mechanic rushed up. He tried to help. Others sprayed foam on the engine. The fire died. In the aftermath, they counted bullet holes. 30 holes pocked the fuselage and wings. The right aileron control rod was severed. The hydraulic reservoir was pierced. Electrical cables were shredded. The radiator had a hole the size of a thumb. The oil cooler was riddled. The engine block had melted in places. The crankshaft was warped. 3 connecting rods were welded to it. The cylinder walls were scored. The engine was junk. Lulu Bell would never fly, but Dinjan had been saved. After his landing, Adair collapsed. Doctors took him to the field hospital. They put him on oxygen. They found high levels of carbon monoxide in his blood. He had inhaled fumes for more than 15 minutes. It should have knocked him out. It didn't, because adrenaline and determination kept him conscious. He slept for 12 hours. When he woke, his commander, Major Edward L. Ed Wynne shook his hand. "You saved our base," Wynne said. The men of the 89th surrounded him. They gave him coffee, cigarettes, and jokes. They examined his hands. They were blistered from pumping the hydraulic handle. His eyes were bloodshot from inverted flight. That night, intelligence officers interrogated Japanese prisoners. They learned that the bombers had returned to Rangoon with their loads. The attack on Dinjan had been canceled because one fighter attacked repeatedly. Japanese pilots said they believed a squadron of P-47s had intercepted them. They couldn't believe one P-40 had done it. They said they had fired until they ran out of ammunition, but could not bring down the lone defender. Allied intelligence estimated that Adair had shot down at least 2 bombers and probably damaged several more. He had certainly broken up the attack. He had prevented bombs from falling on the hospital, the transport planes, and the fuel dump. Without him, the base might have been destroyed, the hump shut down, and the Chinese cut off. On December 16th, 10th Air Force Headquarters sent a report to Stilwell. It described Adair's actions in detail. Stilwell, known as Vinegar Joe, was a stern man. He rarely praised individuals, but he wrote a personal note to Adair. It said, "Your gallant action saved lives and equipment essential to the prosecution of this war. You displayed resourcefulness and courage. The Army is proud of you." On January 8, 1944, Stilwell traveled to Dinjan. In a small ceremony on the sun-baked tarmac, he pinned the silver star on Adair's chest. The citation read, "For gallantry in action in the face of overwhelming odds, 2nd Lieutenant Philip W. Adair did, on the 13th of December 1943, singly engage a force of approximately 64 enemy aircraft, destroying at least 2 and disrupting a bombing attack on an Allied installation. Despite serious damage to his aircraft and personal danger, he continued his attack, saved vital resources, and returned his disabled aircraft to base." Men cheered. Adair blushed. He said little. He had done his duty. After the mission, Adair continued to fly. He flew 95 more combat sorties. He escorted transports, strafed enemy positions, attacked bridges, and fought fighters. He became an ace with 5 confirmed kills. In July 1944, he shot down 2 Oscars in one dogfight. By then, more advanced fighters like the P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt were arriving in theater. They had better performance and range, but the P-40 remained. It was considered obsolete by many, but it was rugged and could take punishment. In the CBI, P-40s remained valuable because they could operate from rough fields and deliver ordnance accurately. The pilots who flew them admired their toughness. The 81st Fighter Group, the Burma Banshees, continued operations until VJ Day. Their skull insignia became feared by Japanese pilots and admired by Allied crews. They destroyed 413 Japanese aircraft in air-to-air combat and 147 on the ground. They lost 63 pilots. The group's motto was, "Adapt and overcome." Adair embodied that he adapted to a damaged aileron by flying inverted. He overcame a burning engine by balancing mixture and throttle. He overcame enemy fighters by using speed and altitude. He overcame an engine seizure by gliding inverted. He overcame a failure of hydraulic pressure by pumping manually. He overcame a lack of flaps by judging his approach perfectly. He overcame fear. This story is about more than one pilot. It is about the complexity of war, the interplay of technology, and human skill. The Warhawk was heavy and not the best turning fighter. The Allison engine was sensitive to heat. The Japanese Oscar was nimble, but lightly built. The Sally bomber was obsolete, but could still deliver destruction. Adair used what he had to fight. He knew the strengths and weaknesses of his machine and the enemy's. He used altitude, speed, and surprise. He accepted risk. He trusted his training. He pushed beyond what manuals advised. He learned that in extreme situations, one must improvise. We should also reflect on the ground crews. While Adair fought in the sky, mechanics at Dingen loaded 50 caliber rounds into belts, refueled tanks, inspected landing gear, and patched bullet holes. They kept the transports flying. Doctors and nurses treated the wounded. Cooks prepared meals. Radar operators watched blips. Drivers hauled fuel clerks, filed reports. A war is won by the collective efforts of many. On December 13th, their work could have been destroyed. It wasn't because one pilot acted. Finally, this story speaks to us across decades. It tells us that courage is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is the decision to act when inaction would be safer. It shows that even old machines can achieve great deeds when in skillful hands. It reminds us of the CBI theater and the Hump airlift, vital yet often forgotten. It encourages us to learn, adapt, and not to give up. Every 4 or 5 paragraphs in this account, we have paused for breath, letting the narrative slow to reflect. Those pauses mirror the pilot's own moments of decision and doubt. They allow us to feel his heartbeat and to consider the weight of his choices. In a documentary voiceover, such pauses would give the listener space to absorb the stakes. They would let the sound of wind in the microphone fill the silence, as if we, too, were in that cockpit. In conclusion, the mission of December 13, 1943 stands as one of the most audacious solo actions of the air war. Adair's alternating inverted and upright flight to counter damaged controls was unprecedented. His inverted approach to landing was improvised and never repeated. His story has become part of the lore of the Burma Banshees. It proves that courage, skill, and ingenuity can turn the tide even when numbers and technology favor the enemy. It reminds us that history is not just statistics and equipment lists. It is the human stories behind them.